G'day, Stu from UAVfutures here, and today we're going to be building this bad boy right here. I mean, look how mean this thing looks. Now, this is the GB190 from GearBest, and this is an absolutely stellar little kit because it's got some fantastic components. It's got like awesome motors, awesome ESCs, a sick FPV camera, it's rocking an on-way antenna, and just pretty much an awesome frame as well. So I'm really stoked to be able to sort of do a build guide for you guys. Now this is going to be a little bit of more of an advanced guide. I do have a beginner's guide and I'll leave a little card or something like that up there for you guys. But some steps in this will be missed, so I might do like one motor and one ESC and then you guys will have to replicate that 4 times. And some of the things like just soldering some of the wires together and some of those small little details like putting heat shrink on those will sort of, I'll discuss them, but I won't show you a step-by-step process. Also, just a couple of notable differences in this build. I switched out my PDB so I could put in a red rotor PDB so we could get a lap timer, and I also put in a different VTX. Anyway, I'm going to stop rambling. I'm super stoked to show you this, but let's stick it on the bench and get started with the build. It's going to be a monster. Alrighty, so let's have a bit of a main look at everything we're going to need, and we're going to start off here. We'll give it a bit of a quick overview, and it looks very messy up the top here, but pretty much what you are going to need up here, you're going to need a frame, and this is the frame sort of put together right here, but this is pretty much what all this is. So you're going to need your carbon frame. Inside here, we've got some little things like your XT60s, some standoffs, a Velcro strap, and little bits of nuts and bolts and screws and all that sort of garbage that comes in here. In terms of our quality components that we're going to be using, you're going to need 4 motors, 4 ESCs. We're going to be using, this is the Runcam Swift, so an FPV camera. Right here you're going to need a flight controller, a PDB, then we've got a VTX, an antenna, and also some props. So pretty much all this stuff comes in the kit. Then what you do need to add in yourself is a receiver. So I'm going to be using this iRange X, the RX800, because that's compatible with my Tyrannus radio. And then throughout the build, I'm going to be adding in a few extras. So you're going to be right to build just the way that it is with this stuff. But in my build, because I plan to be using this one quite a bit, actually I want to have a fair bit of fun with it, I'm going to do a couple of little upgrades to mine. So what I'm going to be doing, I'm going to be putting in a stronger VTX. So when it gets around to putting in the VTX, I'm going to be putting in a 200 milliwatt VTX, and that's probably I'm probably going to be using a pigtail as well. And then the other thing that definitely you don't need to do this at all, and the steps are going to be very similar, but I'm going to be recycling this PDB right here, and this is the red rotor OSD, so I'm going to be using that and putting in a little lap timer system so I can see just how fast my laps are going. This one, it really doesn't change too much. This one is more than capable of doing the job. It's an awesome little PDB, but I figured because I want to use this build a fair bit, I'm going to be sticking that in it. So you don't need to do this at all, and the steps are going to be very similar if you're using this, and I'll explain when these optional extras come up in the build anyway. Alrighty, so with all that said and done, what I think the first thing to do, let's have a look, and I think we should put the bottom of the frame together. So we'll jump over and have a look at the frame. Alrighty, now when it comes to putting the frame together, really it's pretty easy. This frame's not too bad because you've got an awesome set of little instructions right here to follow. So I'm not going to go through the entire process with you, but essentially when you're putting it together, just this bottom part, you're going to have your arm, this upper plate right here, and then this is going to go on top. But all you need to make sure is essentially the screws that come through here, these ones here, 1, 2, 3, 4, so I guess the middle ones are the arms, they need to be the longer screws because they're going to be what is holding up our flight controller a little bit later on. So just make sure you get that around the right way. Anyway, I'm going to cut to what the finalized bit looks like in 3, 2, 1, boop! Alrighty, so here it is. You can see I've done it all up. It's looking, we've just got the base right here. It's nice and tight. I've done them up pretty well. And when you're putting them in, just make sure you tighten them nice and tight, I guess, but not too hard that you're going to strip the bolts. Keep the rest of these bolts in a little bag that you're not going to use because you're going to be using these later on in the build. But once this is all sorted, what we need to do, we're going to go about attaching our motors. Now the motors in this kit are the famous Emax red bottoms, the 2205s, and these are the 2300 kV sort of edition. I really think this is a great choice for a 5-inch prop because you can sort of load it up with any prop that you like, a 5-inch frame I should say. You can load it up with any prop that you like and you're not going to have any issues or overloading the motors or drawing too many amps or anything like that, so they're going to be perfect. What we're going to be doing, they come in these little boxes. Don't throw these out because these are very handy. They come with a whole bunch of sort sort of nuts and bolts and things like that. Just make sure you choose the ones that are correct for your frame in terms of they're going through the carbon arm into the bottom here, but you don't want them to be touching any of the windings inside, because sometimes you can put bolts in that are too long. So just be wary of when you're putting that in, making sure that none of the, you have a bit of a quick squeeze and make sure that none of the bolts are touching any of the windings inside. And also use a little bit of Loctite, because I've got some Loctite right here. This stuff is essential because it stops the screws basically falling out. And to use Loctite, just have a little bit on the end of the screw and then screw it in. You don't need too much at all. Pretty much just needs a sort of a thin little coating on the end. Do them up nice and tight. So we'll do that to all 4 of the motors. Alrighty, so I've got all 4 of my motors in. I'm just going to put a bit of tape at the front here so you guys know which way is the front. And just for future reference, this is the motor directions or the motor numbers. So our motors are going to be labeled 1, 2, 3, and 4. And you can see just by these actually have different threads on them. So these 2 with the dots on them, the little dimples in the top of the threads, I don't know if you can see that too much in the top of the shaft, they're going to be spinning clockwise, and motors 2 and 3, they're going to be spinning anti-clockwise. So it's important because you do need to make sure you get them on the right way, pretty much because you're going to have different lock nuts that go on there. So that's the recommended way to do it. And if I flip this over, you can see underneath, look, this is a little optional thing, but this is what I do, and I find it saves a little bit of weight and it's totally fine. I'm only putting in 2 bolts into my motors, so once I've Loctited them in, they're totally fine. But if you're feeling uncomfortable doing that, or it's your first build, you're not 100% concerned with shaving off all the weight that you possibly can, feel free to put all 4 in there, because it's probably not going to make too much of a difference, but I find I fly fine with just putting in 2 bolts. Alrighty, so next up, let's have a look at our ESCs, and we'll go about putting them into the build. Alrighty, so the ESCs we're going to be using are the DYS XS 30 amp ESCs. They're great because they can take a huge, I guess a massive range of voltages from a 3S LiPo up to a 6S LiPo, and they're running BL-Heli S. And in my experience, BL-Heli S is fantastic. It's super smooth, and you're just going to love it. They go really well with these motors, so it's going to be silky smooth when you're flying around. Alrighty, but before we put it in our build, what we actually need to do is get it ready for soldering. So we've got some little pads just here, and I've got a little bit of blue tack. That's what I'm using to hold down my ESC while I do some soldering. But essentially what I'm going to do, I'm just going to add a little bit of solder to each one of these pads, because we're going to be direct soldering our motors to it a little bit later. Alrighty, so now we've tinned our little ESC here. What we're going to be doing, we're going to be mounting it on the arms, and you can see there isn't very much space at all. So what we are going to be doing is cutting these wires extremely short, and I know that can feel a little bit uncomfortable for some people. So make sure maybe you want to have a little bit of a practice, or if you want your wires to be a little bit longer, you can also double back a little bit. That's a good little tip if you're not feeling comfortable about cutting them too short. I've done this about 1,000 times, so I'm going to be cutting them short and getting them ready to solder up here, but there are some options. So if you do want to run it a little bit longer and sort of double it back to solder it onto here, that is totally fine as well. Alrighty, and then once you've cut it, what you want to do, you just want to strip the end. So there's about 2 mils of wire showing. So there's 1 and 3. And now what we want to do, we want to hit that with some solder, because that's going to make it flow and connect up to our ESC very easily in just a minute. Alrighty, so that's looking nice. Alrighty, now I'm going to just bend these up and rest my ESC in here, and we're going to try and solder this straight up. Now I might turn this around a little bit because I want to get this right. So let's see. Alrighty, so there's one of my ESCs done, and that should fit very nicely just in there like that. What I also recommend is putting a little bit of tape just under here across the arms, a little electrical tape, just to stop any shorts that might happen. It's probably going to be fine, but it's always better to be safe than sorry. Right, so once I've done that to that one arm, I'm going to repeat that process and connect an ESC up to each of the other 3 motors that we've got left. Alrighty, now what I'm going to do, I've got all 4 of those ESCs on here. I'm just going to start to tape up, so I'm going to tape underneath where those little joints are, just in case any water or something gets in there, and then I'm going to go completely around and use that to actually secure my ESC to the frame. So I'm going to tape them all down so it's nice and snug. Right, yeah, so now we've got this bird nest of wires here. What we need to do, and I've forgotten this so many times, is we need to put our Velcro strap in here. So this is the Velcro strap that comes in the kit, but this is one of those things that's a little bit different that I'm going to be doing. I've got my own UAVfutures Velcro straps. This is actually the first one I'm ever going to use, so I'm pretty excited. So I'm going to be putting that one in the build. So yeah, that's what I'm going to do, but you simply slide that up just here through the frame. And then it will simply double back on itself to hold the battery in. So make sure you don't forget that step. Alright, yeah, so now what we're going to do, we're going to move on and we're going to look at our PDB. Okie dokie, so I've got the PDB right here, and you notice there's a bunch of different pads on here. Essentially what we're going to do, we're going to go around and tin all these up so it's very easy to connect up our wires later on in the build. But there is a little bit of a different thing I want to point out. I'm going to be using this old PDB. Now this is a Red Rotor lap timer OSD built-in PDB. So this is what I'm going to be using, but the process is going to be very much the same for hooking up your ESCs. So I'm still going to show you how to do it on this one, but this is the one I'm actually going to be using in the build. Alrighty, so what you want to do is you want to heat your soldering iron up, make sure it's nice and clean on the tip, and then we're just going to pre-tin each one of these pads. Alrighty, so now essentially what you want to do, I've done a couple of them here already, but you're going to just heat up these pads and put in a little bit of solder so they're all nice and tinned up, ready to connect our wires to. And if you're recycling a board like I am, just make sure you put a bit of fresh solder on here, because this is going to be difficult to solder to if you don't have some fresh solder on here. Right, so I've soldered up the PDBs here. Now you're probably just going to be using this one, but I'm going to be using this one. What you need to do is we're going to put it on top of these 4 bolts that are coming out. So once we put our battery strap in here, make sure there's no wires underneath, and simply it should slide very easily over the top of those, because it is the perfect, that's the perfect space around. And also another thing you want to note, that wherever your XT60 is going to be coming out of, so your battery lead, I'm going to make sure you have that towards the back, because that's where I'm going to be running my XT60. So I'm going to be having, this is where I plug them on in this board, but if I was using this board, I would probably say these 2 pads right here would be for your XT60, so your positive and your ground right there. So I'd probably sit it in that way. And then once you've got it in the right way, simply use some little standoffs and that come with the kit and screw it down to sort of hold it into place. Alright, so now the next thing we have to do, we're going to cut our ESC wires and then solder them up to our PDB. So if you're using this PDB, you're going to have a much easier time than I am, because I've got to run all my red leads here, the positive to this one pad just here, and all the grounds to this one just here. So this one, you've got a lot more options. So for each one, you can have positive and ground, positive and ground, positive and ground, positive and ground. So you've got heaps more pads and heaps more room if you're using this one. But for me, I'm going to be soldering them up to this one. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to sort of measure the distance with my finger, mark it out, cut the wire, pre-tin it like we did before with our ESCs, and then solder it down. So a little bit of work, but I'm going to jump cut to what that looks like. So let's check that out in 3, 2, 1. Alright, so there it is. I've cut all my wires, stripped them, pre-tinned them, and connected them up to the board. Now look, this one was a little bit tight, but if you're using the board that comes with it, you're going to have a much easier time. Now what we're going to be doing, we're going to be connecting up the 5 volts. I'm going to be using that to power our flight controller. So let's solder in some of our 5 volt wires. I'm going to do it on this PDB to show you what I'm talking about, but then obviously I'm going to be doing it on this one when it comes to what I'm actually working on. Alrighty, so a fairly easy step. What you're going to be doing on your PDB is simply connecting up a wire to the 5 volt and a wire to a ground. It could be any ground, but I'm going to use the one next to it. Use a bit of blue tack, actually, that's going to make it a bit easier. Rightio. So that would be pretty much ready to connect these up to power our flight controller. What I'm going to do, I'm going to jump over and do this on my build because it's a little bit more crammed in here, but that's how you do it if you're using the standard PDB. Right, so what I'm going to do now is connect up our FPV camera, at least the power to it or the voltage. I'm going to power that from our PDB. So simply right here, we've got a 12 volt and ground. That is where you would connect up the red wire that comes with your camera and also the black ground wire. So I'd connect those straight in. I'm not going to do that because again I'm using this PDB, but I'm going to hook it up to this one, but the process is exactly the same. So I'm going to do that right now. Okie dokie, so I've soldered my camera wires in here, my video positive and my ground, and then I also did the same at the back. So this is where you need to connect up your 12 volt and your ground for your VTX. I've got those two in just here, so that'd be just here. The only difference is with this build, because I'm using the red rotor lap timer system, my video actually runs through the board. So this yellow this yellow wire is actually connected to this one through the board. But in most cases, these would simply be joined up like this, so you could splice those together, so you're getting a feed directly from your camera running straight to your, this end would be on the VTX, so straight to your VTX. Now we've sort of got two options right here. You can either power, this is going to be the power for your flight controller. You can either connect that up underneath, or we can, and the same with the ESC wires, or we can do that on top. So if you want a really clean build and you're I guess really making it, trying to look extra special, you can do it underneath and it's going to be a super clean looking stack. It'll all be hidden by the flight controller. What I'm going to do, just to keep things simple and nice and easy, I'm going to build with it on the top so you can be seeing exactly how it goes. And then if you're feeling confident after watching it a little bit, you can try and do it underneath. And when I say underneath, what I actually mean is soldering onto this side of the board. So that's where, so all these connections would be hidden, and you just see little bits of solder on the top. But the way we're going to be doing it is putting the board on and then soldering over and soldering into these pin outs just here. Alrighty, so what I've done, I put my flight controller on the top, and now before I solder up my wires, what I'm going to do, I'm going to pre-tin the board. So I need to do the signal pads for motors 1, 2, 3, or ESCs 1, 2, 3, and 4. So we're going to go through and do that. Now we're also going to need to do the ground wires below that, because I'm going to hook up the ground wires as well. And then we're going to need a way of powering the board, so we can use the ground and the positive rail on this to power this with 5 volts. And I happen to actually be using the red rotor lap timer system, so that needs to be powered by 5 volts as well. Alrighty, so now we're ready to hook up our signal wires. What I'm going to do, I'm actually going to measure this sort of distance, cut it, strip it back, pre-tin it, and solder it up to the correct pad, just like we did last time with our sort of power leads and ground leads and things like that with our ESCs. Now just a reminder that this is ESC 1, 2, 3, and 4. So they're going to go to the corresponding signal pads of 1, 2, 3, and 4. So I'm going to do that, and we'll cut back to what it looks like when it's all done. Alrighty, so here it is all wired up, and you can imagine just how much cleaner it would be if it was wired up from the underneath side. And all I've got running off here is, this is going to be what's going to be powering my FPV camera, and then at the back here we're going to have our VTX power. One thing, and the video as well. One thing, this little white wire here, don't worry about this unless you're going to be rocking this lap timer system, and I will leave a link down below for this. But what I do need to do is solder in this 5 volt and this ground, and also this little signal wire connected up to this white one. Now this is just for the lap timer. So if you're not doing this step, this is pretty much exactly where we're up to. We're going to move on and look at installing the top part of the pod and putting in the actual FPV camera. But in the interim, what I'm going to do, I'm just going to solder up that, so yours might look a little bit different, and this would be why. While we're here as well, it's probably a good idea to hook up our receiver while we've still got access to the flight controller. So I'm just going to plug that in there, because I'm going to be using S-Bus. And this is my little receiver, this RX800 that works with the Tyrannus, or the FR, the FreeSky sort of stuff. And then all I'm going to do is hook up the corresponding cables, so ground to ground, voltage to voltage, and then the white one, the signal wire, which is the white on this one, to the yellow on there. And my little receiver should be good to go. Alrighty, so now that's all in there. What I need to do, it's really easy, and I've just poked the little wires that we had left out through the top. So I've got my wires to my camera, I've got some that will be running to my VTX, so the video of my VTX, the positive and the ground, and then these ones just here, that is for the lap timer system that I'm going to set up. And now what I'm going to do, rather than, because this is going to be like a bit of a jigsaw, this is the first time I'm building this frame, putting it all together, I'm going to be putting in my VTX, so finding some way to mount my camera and also installing the lap timer system. What I am going to do, rather than you guys watching me do that process, I'm going to show you what the finished item sort of looks like, so how I got those all together, and then I'll be able to explain my choices. Alrighty, so let's cut to that in 3, 2, 1, boop! Rightio, so here it is, all put together, and I think it's looking pretty. We've still got a few steps to go, but I'm pretty impressed with how it came together. But it wasn't very easy getting all the stuff in here, and that's mainly because of this FPV camera. So it's an awesome camera that I have in the front just here, but none of the mounts really fitted very well. So I guess the way that this frame's designed is designed to have a bit of like pressure or friction is what keeps the camera in place and makes it very difficult to sort of put in there. What I ended up doing was screwing in the little back part of the FPV camera here in the Swift, in this little hole right here. That's sort of the swivel part, and then I just had to jam it up and chock it up with some foam to sort of hold it nice and snug in there. So it's probably not the best way of doing things, but it was the best way that I could find to fit this FPV camera in here. So that probably is one little thing that I would like to change. In terms of that, in terms of the rest of the build, I did put the VTX straight underneath that, and that's resting just on a little bit of foam. And I ran just the VTX straight out the back. I'm not going to use a pigtail in this build because that's what I thought I was going to do, but I've decided against that. And instead, there's actually some tiny little cutouts just here, and these tiny little holes, I'm just going to zip tie down my antenna. So hopefully any force that actually hits that is stopped and spread into the frame with that zip tie on there. And the other cool part about this build, right here, you can see this tiny little hole sort of right there. Hopefully that's in focus. That little hole there, I'm pretty sure is probably for your VTX antenna to come out the side and some other things. But I decided I was going to put my lap timer system in there. So hopefully that works. It might need a little bit of adjusting, but it makes for a super clean build. Having that little lap timer IR sort of sensor right there, that's going to be fantastic. And then the only other thing that I still have to fix up is I've got to put my receiver in, and I've been thinking about where to sort of cram that in because there's not too much space in this build. And what I actually think I'm going to do is just simply put it on here and then electrical tape it around there, and that'll sort of waterproof the whole bottom area, sort of make it nice and I guess enclosed, as well as making it probably a little bit more waterproof and looking super awesome. So that's probably my next step, so that's what I'm going to do. And I'll also be zip tying down my, what's this? And I'll also be zip tying down my XT60 connector just here and probably running my antenna. I was thinking about where to run this. Traditionally, most people run them out the top like this, but I'm thinking I might try and run it out the back and underneath one of the arms like that. So I'm going to try that on this build. So here she is. I've done all that, and I got to say, that looks awesome. It's one of the sleekest looking quads I've ever done. I really like the color theme that's going on here. So you can see I've zip tied everything down. It's nice and secure. Running my antenna out the bottom, so it's going to be interesting to see just how that goes. It's a bit of a test actually, but if you don't like that, you can always run that out the top. Now I guess pretty much the final thing, and all we have to do is put some props on. So these motors, these two, you got to be a bit careful because some have reverse threads and some have normal threads. So actually I'm going to put it around this way. So this is motors 1, 2, 3 and 4. So these ones just here, I'm going to bend my antenna up a little bit actually. These ones just here, they will have your little R on the propellers. So you can see that we've got putting on these props just here. It's a standard one. What's this one? There's the other. There we go. So that's how it's going to spin around. We're getting just enough clearance here, so we're not really in any danger of cutting our receiver or anything like that, which was something I was a little bit worried about. But it's looking absolutely, this thing looks like a weapon. I'm going to call it Black Beauty, actually. That's this one's name. So what we're going to do now, I've just got to screw the props down, and we'll be ready to rock and roll. On the last thing too, just make sure you stick this on the bottom. This is what's going to go underneath your bolts right here to protect your battery. So that's pretty much what we're going to stick on there so our battery can sit nice and snug. So rightio, there's my build guide to building the GB190 kit, and it is going to absolutely destroy some of the parks out there. I think I'm going to have an absolute blast with this. This is probably going to be my main acro quad, so I intend to sort of stick some things on here, get a really high angle, and do some crazy acro flying. So hopefully that helped you guys out there build this kit, because it really is a good value kit, a good value for money kit, and I think a lot of people are going to have a lot of fun with this whole frame and this whole setup we've got here. I'm going to stop rambling and I'm going to leave you guys with some flight footage of this thing zipping around, but subscribe for more FPV related content, and as always, happy flying!